Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 136 of the Peak of Serenity podcast. As always, I am one of your hosts, emallson, and joining me, we have my co host, Anomoly.
Hello.
And this week, we are going to be taking a look back at the 9.1 patch cycle. So 9.1, 9.1.5, that is Sanctum of Domination, the second season of Mythic Plus, and when they finally pulled the Ripcord.
9-1, which is like, just as a preview, I was doing this thing has more notes in it than I think I did for the other two, right? Like that I'll end up doing for last week I did or next week's write up, I feel like.
Yeah, I feel like
So,
the looking back at 9.2 is actually to be more about like the crazy tuning of Sepulcher than anything else.
yeah,
This is like
exactly.
this is all the shit we talked about 9.0 last week. This is where they do something about it.
Yeah, finally, yeah.
But before we get into that, Anam, how was your raid week?
Uneventful, which I think is the favorite kind of raid week that we have. Yeah. So I think we sold our, I guess, 4 mounts again. A stark contrast, I'll say, to last week. So last week we had our like 2 hours of wipes to the jailer, and it ended up being real rough. But no, this week was easy. I think we only had a Sylvanas, so we didn't have any. Yeah, so we basically had a quick raid week of just a couple of wipes to Sylvanas. Um, Actually, I think only one. Let me double check. Let me look up logs real quick because I think we only had one, and I think it's because we didn't turn all the affixes on. So yeah, so we had quote unquote one wipe, which is basically us forgetting to turn on all the affixes after the instant soft reset on us, and then
Okay, yeah.
so one of our buyers wasn't ready, so we cleared Terragu, Kalthazad, went then did Sepulcher, and then went back. And so when we came back, the instant soft reset, and we didn't
Okay.
realize we had to turn everything back on. So yeah,
So
I mean,
you did it.
easy raid week.
You did it with all the powers. We were planning
Yeah,
to do. We're doing Sylvanas tonight with a buyer. Um, we were planning to only do one and do the like, it's got interrupts on first.
yeah. We
Um,
did it with all just because. So the only difficult one I think for us is always the soaks. So like the
yeah,
dispels,
yeah.
and we had wiped enough when that was a mandatory one,
Okay.
that we have like the timing
Mhm.
down in terms of like when it does, and then it's just
The other two
having Mo
are
just
like
speeds up
pure
really quickly.
upsides.
Yeah, yeah, and like barrier is just huge to have anyway. So it's like just turn them all on anyway. So yeah, we
Yeah,
did every fight this week with all of it on.
yeah. We don't have that hard one experience with soaks on Sylvanas, so I
Yeah.
think we're leaving that one off.
Gotcha. Yeah, but other than that, it was an easy raid week. It was, we were done in 2 hours, I think. Killed
Nice.
Sylvanas at like 9:45. We start raid at 8. So it was an easy hour 45, 2 hours worth of clears. So no, it was like second to last one. And then I was saying before, we have our last raid week coming up this week, and we have 4 more buyers. So be pretty good in the gold department going into Dragonflight, which is I think a nice
Nice.
position to be in. So
Nice.
yeah.
In contrast,
Oh
did you
no.
know that they had emergency maintenance Friday night?
I did, yeah, because I was AFK leveling some alts, and
Yeah,
they that's then guys, because that was in the middle, yeah, because that was at like what 8 or 9 o'clock
that was in the middle
Eastern
of
that
our
time.
raid.
Oh no.
So
Oh
we already were like kind of playing from behind because we like we've had a lot of people that are just out because it's end of expansion, they're getting their vacation time in now, that kind of thing, plus Thanksgiving coming up, all of that
mhm.
stuff. So we're like 21, 22 people available for raid on Friday. One of our healers oversleeps their alarm, so now we're like trying to figure things out. So we get to Anduin and we have like one of the other team's Evoker alts come in for Anduin,
Nice.
which is how you know it's going great.
Yeah.
And then the maintenance, happens.
No.
Um,
No.
and just like kicks us off for 30 minutes. And then
Yeah.
we get back in, all the trash is respawned. Can't tell if we need to go out and soft reset the instance or not because we can't reach Bolvar without clearing all the trash.
Oh no.
his Bolvar's reset to his initial position. Some people
Yeah.
end up in an instance with Vigilant Guardian still up somehow.
Nice. Okay.
So
And
we took the safe route and we went to Sanctum. We cleared I think we did Airgrew Guardian and Kate just to like burn 30 minutes to have the Sepulcher instant soft reset. Then we went back, everything was fine. We had to clear the trash again, but it was okay.
gotcha.
And then just by the end of the night, people are just making silly mistakes on Rygolon, and we didn't kill. So,
Oh, jeez.
It wasn't like we spent that long on it, but because like at that point in the night, we've lost like,
It was an hour right there
of
with
raid. Just
yeah.
recovering from the downtime. So
Oh,
we're going in tonight, killing Rygolon, Jailer, and Sylvanas.
nice.
And yeah, it's that was an adventure.
How did it? So this week they added the whole you could have all 4 affixes up. Did you do any bosses with all 4?
Yes.
Or
We did Tergru and Guardian with all 4. We turned some off on Kel'Thuzad, and then we did Vigilant Guardian with all 4. We didn't even do the first barrier thing on Vigilant Guardian. Like we've gotten basically to that point before, but it's been like borderline, so we kind of like stop and let it do the thing. Because if you push during the shield, like who knows what happens.
Yeah.
Do not want to mess around with that. But we just like entirely beat it. Just like single targeted the boss down. It's crazy. Anduin, I don't remember how many we had on Anduin. I think we only did 1 on Anduin. We turned on more on Lords, and then we turned on more on Rygolon. Frankly, we don't really get a lot from like moats on Rygolon are actually kind of a pain without a priest.
Yeah.
Like if you don't
we have 2. We have 2. So
yeah, if you don't have a priest life gripping the moats onto your 3rd core soak on Rygolon, you just don't get hardly anything from it. You get like 10, 12 moats.
yeah.
Because nobody else can hit it. They're all, on the boss, on the core that they're supposed to be soaking. So, yeah.
Yeah. We got lucky. We have lucky that we have like typically 2 or 3 priests in our raid. So yeah, for Rygolon, it's always under that 3rd soak for us. And then for Lords, we got like a 40 stack going into the first AoE phase.
Oh yeah.
With barrier, and I think we got the bosses to like 36% after
God.
like the first AoE phase.
Oh my
so
God.
it's like, and then of course like our tanks they're so used to the old movement, so like somebody screwed up a sleeps puddle, or like they're just like inching the bosses around the room.
No,
Or like you literally can run to the other side of the room and we will be fine. Like we so much room.
We in season 4 we switched to doing like massive moves. Like every single mechanic that goes, like every single phase that happens, we at minimum move. Like there's the different sections in the room. We at minimum move 1 section. At minimum. Like if there's a bad sleepy bait, fuck it, 3. Like let's go.
Yeah. I need to get our tanks on that mentality.
There's so much space. Like we reached the 2nd swarm phase, and bosses died like 10 seconds in.
Yeah. It's I love season. This is I hope they do this again.
Yes.
Like I think regardless of how you feel about the affixes, and I guess we'll talk about this eventually maybe, but this is a quick thing. I think this was a cool end of expansion thing.
Yes.
Right. That lasted a little bit longer than like the typical like pre-patches typically like this, which is like 3 or 4 weeks versus, we had a couple months of this. So
I think my main gripe still is primarily the affixes being just like progressing the affixes not being fun. Nobody really had a good time like progressing this 1 additional bullshit affix. And 2, should have just undertuned start. Like it's undertuned right now. It is undertuned right now. They should have just undertuned it from the start. Like it's the end of the expansion. People just coming off a grueling progression tier that many people didn't even finish progressing until the last week of season 3.
Right.
If they even finished progressing it. Like a lot of guilds did not get CE.
Yeah.
So you have people coming off this like really grueling progression tier, going right into season 4, and like it should have been like right now it's about 30% easier than it was before
Mhm.
pre-patch. It should have been 30% easier from the start. Like
Yeah.
they should have just undertuned it by 30%. And like that's that's not like an oh it's too hard. It's just like I didn't really want to deal with it.
Yeah, I
Like
don't wanna progress again, yeah.
the progression of this season was not fun. It wasn't fun progressing half of, or like not even half, like progressing like 8 out of 10 in 3 different raids, and then going back and progressing the last bit of each raid. Like that was not fun coming off of Sepulcher. Like people wanted
Yeah.
chill farm. We did not get chill farm until pre-patch. So like in pre-patch, everybody's been like, oh yeah, this is great.
Yeah.
This is what they wanted. At least in my guild, this is what people wanted out of season 4. It's like pre-patch, like yeah, we can just go in and do silly things with these bosses, go for like sub-minute kills, like
Mhm.
meme chaos, moat shenanigans, like let people pad, you know,
Yeah, that type of
stuff.
stuff, yeah. Yeah.
Not reprogressing bosses with the interrupts and soaks.
Yeah, I would have been fine if they kept like I think I was fine with the difficulty. I agree, slightly easier would have been nice. I think the thing is, number one, some of the affixes unfun, and number two, the
Yeah,
rotation of affixes
yeah,
was just annoying. It was like
yeah,
every 3 weeks relearning the fights. I think was
yeah,
sort of annoying. So if they kept, adjusted affixes to be less sort of wipey and a little bit easier to deal with, and then also just keep it consistent from the start. I think that
yeah.
just makes it, I think, just a little bit better for next
Yeah,
time.
I mean,
So
like one final note, and we'll move on because we got a
yeah,
lot of stuff to talk about.
yeah,
I do think that this season kind of illustrates the difference between affixes in raids and in keys. Where like in
yeah.
keys, I mean, I know Shadowlands Dungeons are maybe an exception to this, but a lot of bosses and trash packs just don't have that many. So you have the
Yeah.
affixes that add mechanics in. Um, Especially with Sepulcher. Like Sepulcher was clearly like a step above in this regard, but like raid bosses have just mechanics of Mythic. Like there's no space on some of these bosses to fit a fix that may spawn at a bad time. You know, you think
Mhm.
about the initial issues with the jailer and creation spark, where like you literally had to instant dispel it or people died,
Right.
right? Because the boss is just wall to wall mechanics.
Mhm.
And that's less true in Sanctum, which I think is why Sanctum was actually the easiest raid of season.
Yeah.
There's more dead space for you to fill with these affixes. Castle Nathria like varied from boss to boss. Like the Nathrias did not have a ton of dead space, but then uh, Sludgefist has a bunch, so it varied. But Sepulcher had none for the whole instance.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, agreed. Agreed. So, yeah, well, I think we'll talk a little bit more about this next week as we get into that part of the retrospective for sure. So,
Yep.
so cool. So I think maybe we jump into a little bit of a week in review
Yep.
before we talk about the 9.1 and 9.1.5 patches. So, probably go through this fairly quickly. A couple of big stories and then kind of move to that piece. So, first up, phase 2 of Dragonflight pre-patch launched this week. So you can now make your evokers. You can do all the amazingly interactive pre-patch event stuff. You can do the new dungeon, or not the new dungeon, but the dungeon quest for Dragonflight. So
You can do the
um,
new dungeon.
so
Voldemort.
yeah, the old one. Yeah, that's what I said. But well, it's not.
Oh,
It's like the same. I guess it's kind of the same dungeon, but there's new bosses and
it's
stuff.
not the same. It's
That's
not
okay.
the
Fair
same as
enough. Fair
old Voldemort.
enough. Fair. So the new dungeon Alderman. And yeah, it's interesting. I think the pre-patch this time is just I think the same as it has been the last couple weeks. There's like events going on in specific zones. You go to the event, hang out for a couple minutes, big thing spawns, you kill it, and you get some stuff. There's
Yeah.
currency that drops for catch-up gear. I don't know about you, but I've been a huge fan of the whole join a group that's farming mobs there and just AFK in the air, and you gain about a level every 30 to 45 minutes. So if you need to level an alt from 50 to 60, that's the best way to do it right now. You can participate if you want to, but
Didn't
um,
so they did it was actually a lot faster than that prior to the Emergency maintenance Friday.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
The Friday hot fixed it. I guess, yeah, sorry. I haven't, luckily I got all the alts that I cared about done. I think
Yeah.
by like Thursday, I think I did one after raid on Thursday and that was it. So, for my last one. So, but yeah.
There is one important thing from the um, event that you should try and go get. It takes like 30 seconds to get if you're already level 60, and that is the reagent bag. You need to
Oh,
get
yeah.
5 of the random green item that gets dropped by the event mobs. You don't have to actually complete any of the events. You don't have to do the boss. You don't have to do very much of anything. Loot like 5-6 mobs. It's like an 80% drop rate, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need 5 of them. Then go to the vendor in Orgrimmar or Stormwind and buy your 20 slot reagent bag. Um, that is like the one thing that I think is actually like relevant for if you're just like playing a max level character and don't care about leveling alts, do that. If you do care about leveling alts, they're still actually really good XP. They're just not quite as insane as they were last Friday.
Yeah, that's true. And there also is a heirloom trinket. Basically each of there's 4 elements that can spawn. I think they're on a 3 or 4 hour timer they adjust in each of the areas, but there's 4 elements and each boss of that element has a chance to drop an item. You need 1 item from each boss and you can combine it into an heirloom trinket that does it's like primary stat plus has like a damage proc.
Yeah.
Um, so if you care about heirlooms, grab that. Uh,
Speaking of evokers, did you all do evokers in main raid this week?
uh no, because although so funnily enough, we only have 1 person in the raid going Evoker, and he didn't have time to
I guess
like
that's fair rating Tuesday.
get any sort of like leveling done. I
Yeah.
think he actually had leveled it, but like he was like, it's in whatever
Like
leveling
high
gear that
level
came up, and
200. Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
since we were only doing a mount run, he's like, I just don't. He's like, I'll just
Yeah.
get a gear in
Yeah.
Mythic Plus or something this week.
We
So
we uh we had 4 evokers in for some of the bosses. Like Anduin, Jailer, Sylvanas, we were like, no evokers, mains only.
yeah,
And any others, we had some evokers in. But we also,
nice.
again, raid on Friday, so people had Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday to gear up, and our evokers were like 280 to 290. So
Oh, that's not too bad. Yeah, yeah. Um, so cool. I will say too, the currency that drops for like catch up gear, you get a ton of it. So like, I think I've gotten enough to buy 2 of my alts, full 252 or whatever the gear
yeah,
is. So it's been really actually nice from that. So
yeah,
um, so cool. That's basically pre-patch. I mean, it's not a ton new, just the events. So um, so cool. So then the other thing that Blizzard dropped this week was they are doing some class tuning. They're adding some soft caps to certain AoE abilities. So while it's not a hard cap, basically it's, as certain abilities do damage beyond 5 targets, that damage is then reduced. So the monks were hit by this. So Resonant Fists, which is the sort of the class tree
yeah.
middle one right before capstone. The Windwalker
The one
capstone
that might as
basically.
well be Capstone. Yeah,
Yeah. That one received the whole reduced damage after 5 targets thing. But other than that, I mean, there's a couple other ones like Druids got hit with it with some of their bleeds, and Bell
yeah.
Rush for Havoc got hit. So a couple classes got this sort of, beyond 5 target reduced damage,
It's
so
so you've if you've been around like some of the brewmaster stuff, you've probably seen people linking like screenshots of them being top DPS in Mythic Plus on beta, and it's
mhm.
because of Resonant Fists being uncapped effectively. Like Brewmaster does a lot of damage, but also Resonant Fists being uncapped kind of put them above and beyond. Where if you were able to pull 2 or 3 attacks together, then your Resonant Fists just goes crazy. So that getting a soft cap is not surprising. Um, it's better
Gotcha.
than the alternative of nerfing some of our damage that would impact more single target, low target count scenarios and hurt us in raid or just like casual keys where you're back at a time.
Right, yeah. Right. Yeah. So not, I mean, I think a couple people are slightly upset about it, but I think at the end of the day, it's generally a fine change in terms of damage balance in AoE situations. So um, other than that, I don't think there was any other class tuning to monks specifically over the past week or so. So um, So cool. So then the next up item is there was a bunch of interviews done. So like if you go out there and look, Ian's been interviewed, Morgan Day's been interviewed, Jeremy Fiesel and some other folks from the team. So there's it's sort of interview time where different sort of content creators or publications are doing interviews with a lot of the different dev leads. So I'd say go out and sort of read all of them. My personal opinion is the Morgan Day and Max interview is very good.
Yeah,
Just in terms of, I think Morgan is a very good person to give answers in that he seems to be slightly more excited about answering things than some of the other folks, and feels like he's giving slightly more personal answers, which I think is good. So the Morgan interview with Max is really good, and then of course I think Ian's always an interesting interviewer, but he just has some really good points from some of his stuff. So I think we'll start with the Morgan interview first. With Max, they talked about a bunch of different stuff. I think one of the things I did want to highlight is Max does ask him about the creation catalyst and the fact that it isn't like a day one thing or an earlier than 6 week thing. And sort of Max's question comes from the point of view of a Mythic Pluser or a PvPer where it's their potentially only source of tier. And Morgan's answer, which Max thought was very good, and I also, when I heard it, hadn't thought of this, is Morgan's answer was essentially that, like, from a competition perspective, if you're a raider, your competition starts or is sort of like the first part of any patch cycle or season, right? Like you're trying to beat those bosses as soon as possible. So it makes sense that the boss you kill drop the tier you need. For Mythic Plus and PvP, their main competition sort of is backloaded, meaning like they don't start pushing the highest keys or pushing the higher rating until the end of a season. So the fact that the creation catalyst is delayed for them generally has less of an impact of their overall finishing or their overall competition, right? Because it's so far backloaded. Which I thought was an interesting take in terms of like why it isn't sooner specifically for those two groups. I think there's still debate of if 6 weeks makes sense. I think Emallson, you're on the side of that. That seems like a little too long to
yeah,
bring it in. But
yeah,
um, but it's interesting that it's not a huge like from I agree now that it's not a huge disadvantage for Mythic Plusers or
yeah.
PvPers.
There's kind of a wrinkle in the Mythic Plus angle where like you still really benefit as a Mythic Plus player from doing Mythic Raid because of
Right.
gearing. It's going to give you much better access to gear, be able to push higher key. That
Hmm.
may be less true in Dragonflight with the increased gear level that you can get from keys. So we're gonna have to like see. But currently, at least, that is very true. Where like um, the highest key pushers are also all Mythic Raiders because of the gear acquisition from raids. Um, Especially stuff like unique items that you cannot replace from Mythics. So
Yeah. Yeah, there
PV-
is. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
PvP though, with the change to having PvP eye levels in 9.05, 9.1. Actually, we'll talk about that a bit. But
Yeah.
uh, with that change, PvP gear is just better in PvP than PvE gear. So, when they get their tier set, when the catalyst opens, or before if they get lucky from, then you know they win.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was an interesting answer to that. There was also he talked a little bit about the seasonal affixes. Um that that basically the idea now with the fact that they're sort of previously to this expansion, the dungeons were set at the start. So you did the same dungeons over and over again season to season. There wasn't sort of a change in that. And so the affixes were meant to be not only new and exciting, but also would change the way you approach a dungeon, right? So
Right.
they had to be both they couldn't just be like a buff or something you dealt with. It had to be also something that was route changing or like interaction changing. And
Yeah.
so what they said about thundering specifically is that you can technically ignore thundering. Like when thundering goes out, you can just have all 5 players stand on top of each other and it just clears immediately and you never get the issue with stunning, extra damage, all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
And the reason they want to do that is that it's sort of with the dungeons now being the focus of them changing season over season. You have to sort of learn the new dungeons, learn the new routes, and your mastery then becomes knowing the dungeon versus knowing how to interact with the affect because
Right.
everything
Right.
changes season to season. So um I guess that'll potentially we'll see some more interesting things around like the affixes being less about like massive changes the way you approach doing a dungeon and more about like things that you sort of just have to interact with or can potentially ignore
Right.
as you do things. So
Yeah.
um ignoring, of course, and Morgan makes the case too. Like if you do that whole thundering, ignoring thing, it makes doing the dungeon generally harder because you do
Yeah.
less damage, you do less healing, but it means you don't have to deal with that affix. So
Right.
you know, things like that. So,
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything else from your perspective out of the Morgan interview. Um,
Um, I thought it was a fairly good interview overall. Uh, Definitely go watch it. The major things I think you already touched on,
mhm,
right? Like those are the two big things. Um, Max did ask about like what kind of stuff we're gonna see in 9.1, and
mhm.
Morgan's answer is basically I can't talk about that yet, and that's fair.
Yeah.
Um, but that remains, I guess. But yeah, they've been on an interview blitz this week. There's actually one that got posted to Polygon last night. Wowhead has notes up from it. Um,
Mhm.
that's more on the like world content side, which has some stuff in it that I think is very interesting and has me a little bit hopeful for like future content design direction.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna lie, all of my time on beta pretty much has been like raid testing or dungeon, not not world content. I did Azure Span when alpha opened, and I have not done any of
Yeah, I've done the starting to get to dragon reading like 2 or 3 times just to make sure I'm good at that, but like beyond that I've not progressed
yeah.
really further. So
I guess I've
it'll
done
all
the
be new.
intro to the Waking Span or whatever.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, I think the only other part of these interviews, so the Ian interview, they do ask a question about like if they're changing the way Hall of Fame functions with the fact that you can do cross faction raids
And the
now.
answer is no.
And the answer is no, but as a part of that answer, Ian also says it's not if. He's like, we will probably make a change once cross faction guilds are in, and it was a basically of when. It's not a question of if they're coming; it's just
Right.
when.
Yeah.
So
Which is
it seems
good.
like cross faction guilds are coming. I can be a gnome again. It's
It's
great. So
I
excited.
mean, you could come right on the weekend to be a gnome with us.
That's true. I could. I could. I could.
Tony's gonna kill me for suggesting that, but
It's true.
uh, yeah. I mean, we have it cross faction, but we're not also not in Hall of Fame running, right? Like we could get Alliance Hall of Fame if we wanted,
Yeah.
but we couldn't get Horde Hall of Fame without like massively outperforming like 300, right?
Yeah.
We'd have to
Yeah.
do so much better in Sepulcher, and we already did good in Sepulcher, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So I thought that was just interesting in that, yeah, it seems like cross faction guilds are going to be sooner rather than later. So that'll be fun. Um so cool. But yeah, check out all those interviews. They're actually all there's some probably more interesting tidbits we're missing, but I think those are like the major hits. So a couple of quick hit stories here at the end, and then we'll get into sort of the retrospective side. So real quick, MOP and 1 WOD world boss mounts drops have been greatly increased, primarily due to the fact that for about 12 hours, if you were an evoker and you killed these mount dropping bosses like Shah of Anger, Nalek, some of the other ones that drop mounts, you automatically got the mount because that was the only item on the loot table that could drop for you. So yeah, the evoker loot tables for those world bosses only contain the mounts. So if you're an evoker and you killed it, you got the mount as a 100% drop rate.
Well, it wasn't
Um,
100%. It was like if you got loot, you got the
oh
mount.
yeah, sure. Yeah,
So like what
exactly.
the strat what people in my guild are doing, what the
Oh,
strat was you would go and you would farm up lesser coins, and
okay.
you don't need that many of them, right? But you would
That's
go
true.
and you would kill it, and you can bonus roll it over and over. As far as I know, you
That's
just
true.
so you would kill it, you would bonus roll. If you didn't get it, you wait for the next spawn, you bonus roll again until you get the mount. And it doesn't take that many tries to get them out using that technique if you're guaranteed to get them out, get loot.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
So
So yeah.
basically, they fixed that, and then they were like, well, these mounts being like a quarter of a percent drop rate or whatever. Maybe it's been long enough. And they increased it. I don't know, greatly increased from like nearly 0%. It means a lot of things. I don't know if they actually gave us the percent, but it's significantly higher. A lot of people in my guild have gotten them the normal way in the
Gotcha.
days since the hotfix.
Nice. Nice. Yeah. So if you like those mounts and don't have them yet, go and farm, Shavanger, all those guys. I think they're on like a 15-minute respawn timer. So
Yeah,
just fly to the zone. It'll eventually spawn quickly, and you can pick it up.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so that happened. Next up was Blizzard and NetEase are suspending services in China. So if you don't know about the relationship of producing or publishing a game in China, you have to have a Chinese publisher for your game that will run your game for you, and then you can sell it to individuals in China. Blizzard has been partnered with NetEase since
2008.
like yeah, for years and years and years.
Yep.
And yeah, they're ending their partnership. They are ending it, and the final day of service of WoW, not just WoW, but it's WoW, it's Overwatch 2, it's
Hearthstone.
Hearthstone,
Yeah.
it's everything but Diablo Immortal actually, um,
It's
which is
actually
funny.
really funny. I saw people commenting like, this is like their comeuppance for all the shit with Diablo Immortal. And it's like they get to keep that one.
Yeah,
That one's
yeah,
fine.
yeah. So all that ends the end of January, January 23rd. So yeah, so they couldn't just, I guess the two companies couldn't come to a licensing agreement. Both sides have said they're trying to work together, but sort of fallen through. There's some interesting tidbits that some industry folks that have sort of come out and said Blizzard is kind of asking for a lot more either money or a lot more upfront stuff. Other people have said that with the Microsoft merger looming, NetEase wanted some breaks because Microsoft's such a large company, so they wanted some other guarantees of maybe getting some of the Microsoft library and sort of pulling that into China. So
Right.
an interesting thing. I will say that funnily enough, some of the people have commented that China has sort of suspended. They kind of have been cracking down on gaming in general, and I don't think they've added a new Western game to the ability to be sold in the company since PUBG. Diablo Immortal is an interesting one because it was essentially a co-developed game, so technically it was
Right.
developed by a Chinese company. But yeah, they haven't. I think it's been a couple of years since they've let a Western game into China. So people are saying it might be a while till Blizzard comes back to
Yeah.
China with these
It's a
games.
little bit so WoW Classic in China is really big. Really,
Yeah.
really. Um
Yeah, the other thing too is I read an article. I didn't realize this at the time, but Wrath of the Lich King actually came out months later in China
yes.
because of all the changes they had to make to the game to support it. So that's why it's such a big deal because China got Wrath for such a short amount of time in the overall
Interesting. Okay.
Blizzard life cycle that people revere Wrath as the expansion that sort of everybody wanted to play because it was so big outside of China and they didn't get it till
Shortly
years
before
later.
Cataclysm. Yeah.
Yeah, basically,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, so cool. So yes, that sucks for sort of the Chinese market, but hopefully they figure something out. We'll see. So a couple of quick, just more, I guess, really quick stories. Blizzard did do a tuning pass on gems and enchants. They have been nerfed, so secondary stats have been nerfed on those. Secondary stats on gems are down about 62%. And then secondary stats um on ring enchants are down a similar amount, about 60-ish percent. So some more tuning from a professions perspective coming in. Gems and enchants seemingly a little bit less impactful um, right now. So yeah, we'll see how that sort of lands out. And then finally, tomorrow, Monday, or if you're listening to this, we're listening to this live. It's tomorrow. If you're listening to this,
Later.
when it gets
You've missed it.
released, you've probably missed this, but on Monday, November 21st, Blizzard is testing the launch. So they're bringing all the beta servers down and then bringing them back up to basically test the launch procedures. So, um, yeah, I guess if you want to test and sort of load test the servers, hop on and see if you can crash beta. Hopefully that means, you know, the live launch is a little bit better. So,
Yeah.
um, So cool. All right. Well, let's get into, I guess, the main topic for today, which is a little bit of a patch 9.1, 9.1.5 retrospective. Um, and go through some of the big things. So I think in terms of maybe we'll start with the big new stuff that happened, right? And then we can
Right.
talk 9.1.5 is the changes. So maybe we quickly go through here's all the new stuff that came in with the patch, and then we'll talk about, all the Ripcord stuff. So that'll be the bulk of the conversation. So 9.1.5 was of course the Chains of Domination patch, brought in Sanctum and Korthia as sort of the new zone. There was so that was fun. I don't know. I mean, if we kind of talk about Korthia a little bit as sort of an outdoor zone, I hate like to this day, Korthia is probably one of the worst pieces of outdoor content I've ever done. And not and
Wait,
honestly,
worse than the Maw.
I would yes, and my reason is not that
Okay.
it was more frustrating to do because and here's the reason is like the mall was frustrating to do, but you knew what you needed to do. You knew that you
Yeah,
need to get your dailies done. You knew that like
I was
you
gonna
got
comment on
the
that.
eye was thing, things
Yeah,
like that. Korthia was frustrating because it felt like they didn't explain half of the systems that were like
yeah.
enabled in Korthia, right?
Korthia was like the Maw. There was a lot of like you knew what you needed to do. Figuring out how to do it most efficiently was like part of the game.
Right. Hmm.
Um, Korthia was just obtuse. Not only like it wasn't that you knew what you needed to do and you just had to figure out how to do it efficiently. You didn't know what you need to do, and also didn't know how to do it. So like there's a big gap between there's like spreadsheets and Google Docs and things going around in the early few weeks of like here's all the different things that you could do to get your whatever research.
Yeah, like your research
Yeah,
items for the rep that was there. Yeah.
yeah, and it was just obtuse. It was just
The whole
obtuse.
the whole second area with like using broken portal keys to go into like the shadow realm or whatever you want to call it,
Right.
like
Like
did
okay,
not realize that was a thing until like the third week in because I was like trying I was like I got into like my I'm gonna get every rare because I want to just kill all the rares. I was like, okay, I sat at this one
right.
spot for like literally like 45 minutes to an hour. Thing never spawned, and I started reading like Wowhead comments. I was like, oh, like, what do they mean? Like, use a broken portal key? Like, what the hell is that? Like, go to
Yeah.
this cave. I'm like, what does this even mean? And
Yeah.
so then I realized it
That
was
was
an entire
actually
other zone.
so like I we had people week one that knew like, oh, there's these group keys that you can use and you can go here and you can kill this rare and it gives you a bunch of like rep and things. It's like okay.
Yeah.
Um and but then after that I have like the single like personal keys. Where the hell do you use them? Like I know now, but
I only know of one spot, by the way, to use
there
it. I don't know
there
if that's the only. Is there only one?
there's others that can randomly spawn from killing rares in the world. There's like certain
Okay,
rares you
that's
can kill
just.
that leave behind portals. But then there's that one in the cave that's always
Yeah.
active, and there's no indication.
Yeah, no.
So
I think I randomly
later in
found
a
it.
hotfix, they added indication to that cave
Gotcha.
so that you can find it more easily. Well, holy shit! Like that, and so the other thing is like the quests take you into that. They don't explain why you would go back.
No. Yeah, no.
They don't explain how you get back, other than that you need a key. So, like, you know you need a portal key, but you don't know where the portal is because you don't
Exactly.
actually go through that cave as part of the quest.
Right. Yeah.
Um, it, yeah, it was just a mess. It was a mess.
Yeah, and it
Um,
was like the whole island area, like that you jump across, like getting across to there for the first couple times, like until they showed you of like the way you jump was awful, and then you finally got like the mount or like the flight point kind of that,
yeah,
that took you there that made it easier. But like that
grappling.
area, like I hate it when like you're supposed to traverse around something and it's just densely populated with mobs, or like I get like there are fortress like areas in WoW. I understand that, but like this was like something where it's like it dropped you off and there was mobs right next to the drop off point, like
Right.
immediately in combat. You're like,
Yeah.
give me like some safe space to like get my bearings. To like maybe I went to get a drink as I was on this flight path, right? So yeah, I mean, I ultimately really disliked Korthia. Um, and it the other thing too, and this is me just now nitpicking because I disliked it so much. I was like, it was probably like a good like 2 minutes too wide of a zone if you think about like running across it. Like it just felt like getting to that like southwestern portion to do some of the dailies always felt like it took like just like a minute too long to get there.
Yeah. The
Like
other thing is they had pretty significant variance in how much rep you get per day because of how much was tied to killing rares and getting the drops from the rares. If you got
yeah.
the purple items that gave like 250 rep, you know, that's obviously significantly better than getting like 3 of the green items.
Mhm.
And if you
Yeah.
have a few rares, like some days you could get 3 purple items, and some days you could get nothing but greens.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so there was like a couple days variance, and that's not a big deal for most people. The people that like really care about like I'm gonna get like this first, which there are a couple of my guild that are like, hey, I'm gonna do the grind. I'm gonna be the first one done, and
Yeah.
just like going in there and getting nothing but low value green rep tokens basically was a frustrating experience for them. I will say this is the second like end game rep zone that I did not really do. I went back
Yeah.
and I did it after they like quintupled the amount of rep you got.
When they pulled the ripcord, yeah.
Yeah, when they pulled the ripcord, when they like quintupled it, then I went and I did it for conduits and gems.
Yeah.
But that was the reward for this, right? The reward was
It's-
was conduits and gems, and it was the very annoying way of doing conduits where you have to like go buy a single conduit item, go back to your covenant hall, use it, go back to and it's not like a specific conduit, it's a random one. Um, and it was like this very slow process of going back and forth.
yeah.
But then we had people that like stockpile like 80,000 research, so as soon as they hit the because there was nothing else to spend it on, right?
Right. Yeah.
They just stockpiled it all, and then when they
And then
hit
you had
max, they went and bought their conduits and gems and everything.
yeah, the gem slots I think were like the big thing that people also disliked about the zone is that it was like getting extra sockets was tied behind getting essentially exalted or tiers. I think this was a tier based thing, so it's like getting tier 6, right?
Yeah,
To do it. So is yeah, I mean, in general, this like this zone was like not exciting. I will tell you this though, in my personal life was at a time when like I didn't have a lot of work stuff going on. So it was like a very chill, like
yeah,
sign on, do some emails in the morning, get to reset, and then like do my like sit in the zone and wait for like rare calls and like run
yeah,
around. So
yeah.
but yeah, I was not the biggest fan of Korthia at
This is
all.
also so Morgan Day actually commented on the kind of structure of the rewards in the Maw and in Korthia in his
Mhm.
interview with Max, which I think is interesting and I forgot to bring up. And basically said that they they basically saw the gem rewards in particular, the socket rewards in particular, is like a a way for people to get that like very small additional power gain,
Mhm.
guaranteed. You can roll a socket just naturally, but you can also do the rep grind and you can get it guaranteed. And the essence of it was that people did not see that 5% power gain as option,
Right. Yeah.
and
Which
and you know had significantly less fun because they felt like it was the conduits he didn't even mention, which the only way to get the highest high level conduits was to do the rep grind.
yeah.
Very dumb. Actually,
Yeah.
there was some you could get from the raid, like other than like the 3 that dropped from the raid. The highest high level came from Korthia, and those to get them.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like, yeah, I think that the funny thing is like Blizzard actually realized that like any sort of power gain is generally going to be considered mandatory from a community perspective. So it's an easy way to upset people. But yeah, but that's I mean that's Korthia. I don't think we either of us have good things to say. And even and we'll quickly I guess we can touch on it here. Even the 9.1 or 9.15 changes to Korthia just basically sped it up. Like it became kind of a joke at that point, which was
They
nice,
did
but it's
speed it up a
still
lot. Like I actually
yeah.
at that point did the rep grind on like 3 characters because you could do it on 3 characters in significantly less time than it took to do it on one.
Yeah.
And part of that was that they, as part of boosting the drop rates of the research tokens, it made doing this route of killing the big like tornado dudes in the
Mhm.
in the shadow realm just super efficient. So you would go in with
Right.
a group token, you'd go and you'd do a loop and you'd kill like 20 of these things, and then you'd go back out, you'd turn in your token again. And so unlike the rare thing where you had like a daily limit on the rares,
Mhm.
um, you had this super efficient route that had no cooldown effectively, just however much time you could spend on it. And that was actually like I've commented before that I wouldn't mind these things as much if I could just like sit down on a Saturday and like watch a TV show and do a rep grind. And that's
Yeah.
basically what this let me do. Like I sat down on a Saturday and I did the rep grind on my paladin.
Nice. Nice. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so that's, I mean, I think that's Korthia in a nutshell. It's just sort of some mandatory power gain behind a very tedious grind, and like a zone that was not very easy to like understand the mechanics of like
Yeah.
out of the gate. So
And I think
yeah.
one thing to take forward from this zone is that there are very few things more frustrating as a player than not understanding what it is you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah. I would agree. So the other thing that came in this patch was we got new Soulbind tiers and new capstone abilities on our Soulbinds. So this was really nice. A couple of this turned some of just even entire covenants into the covenants you'd now pick just based on some of the
Yeah.
Soulbinds. Um, so yes, that was a nice. I think everybody got another potency conduit slot,
Yeah.
one sort of either defensive or finesse was the other kind of slot, um, and then uh, um, and then yeah, it was a nice extension of the system, right? Like it's sort of like new renown levels tied to new capstone or new soulbind levels. So
And this is
natural
something
progression.
like I mentioned last week that a lot of the kind of like covenant defining soulbind powers weren't in yet in 9.0.
Hmm.
This is where they're all added. This is where Dreamweaver gets the haste circle. This is where you get Kevin's oozling. This is where you get the damage on Ameni's like fleshcraft. This is where you get the cooldown reduction on the Mechanicos tree. This is where you get the T from what's his face? Theatar.
Theatar C, yeah.
Like all of these like really high end powers that are super super good come
Hmm.
from this patch. So that's
Yeah.
that was also really really big for like reshuffling covenants, which is another thing. Initially at the launch of the patch, they basically reset your covenant swap like
Right.
so the way it worked initially, as a refresher, you could swap to a new covenant basically for free, no cost. You just had to like catch up on renown. Um,
Hmm.
the uh, but the catch was if you had say started as Night Fae and then swapped to Kyrian to go back to Night Fae, you had to do 2 weeks of like grind quests.
Yep.
And what they did for this patch is they reset that, so you could then, if Night Fae was now your best again, you could swap back to Night Fae, no questions asked. But you
Immediately.
then couldn't swap back to Kyrian again.
Yeah, without that 2 week grind. Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
also the patch, as a little just fun aside, this is also the patch that had all the Covenant dudes in Oribos around the quest giver,
Yeah.
and you had people accidentally swapping Covenants
They're just click and throw.
because they're just clicking through this is your brain on Azeroth autopilot, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So definitely a little bit of a reshuffle. We'll talk about that in a second. With specifically, I have some comments on Mistweaver there, but yeah, so they added those new tiers. This also was flying was now enabled, so you could fly in all the old zones, which was or not old zones, I guess the bastions, the
Yeah.
whatever the Sinfall, Venthyr. Anyway, those zones you could now fly in. You couldn't fly across the zone still, so it was just like within
Yeah.
the zone.
There's basically like a
Um,
giant ocean for all intents and purposes in between.
yeah,
And so you can't.
not I will tell you I still like I don't remember that you can fly ever. Like I just it still is not a big thing to me.
Yeah.
Like in those
I do
zones.
because I play Kyrian and flying is how you escape the order call.
Oh, that's true. That is true. That is true. The other big thing in this patch was the Torghast updates, which I think was really something we should spend maybe a second or two on. So this was the patch where they added tower knowledge
Yep.
and changed the whole way that the system works. So instead of like having like a death counter and then you sort of just died, they added a point system. So you basically got the faster you did it essentially or more efficiently with less deaths, you got points.
Yeah.
Based on your points at the end of it, at the end of a Torghast run, you got currency or like a point, I guess, yeah, a currency that
It,
you could then spend to get
yeah.
upgrades
Yeah.
with the tower
Important
knowledge.
importantly, the um actual like legendary resource reward wasn't tied to your points, but you
Exactly.
needed to get
Yeah.
a certain number of points in order to progress to the next forecast level to get even more legendary.
Exactly.
Um, yeah, tower knowledge is actually really big. This
Yeah.
patch is actually like Torghast. like there were two things. One, Soul Ash is basically free at this point because there's a new currency for your legendaries, which meant you were actually kind of free to just craft a low eye level version of whatever legendary. This
Mhm.
meant that for Monk, you could craft the Touch of Death legendary basically for free at eye level 190, and it was super, super good. Um, and uh, then Tower Knowledge giving you like huge amounts of extra like common and uncommon powers um, was another really big thing for enabling kind of the like hilarious monk builds where you would pick up corrosive dosage and also get like no cooldown touch of death and
Yeah.
also like the uncommon fort brew power that increased your HP based on the number of times you would cast touch of death. And so
Yeah.
you'd run around casting touch of death on things. And like I have a screenshot somewhere of me with like 8 million health with fort brew and we're just pushing
Just
touch of death on the end boss of adamant
everything.
vaults.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and that well, this is the patch that at Adamant Vault where if you perfected a run, there was like an extra bonus floor that gave you more tower knowledge, I think, and some other.
it gave
It had a chance to
you
drop sockets too, I think,
a
right?
conduit or a
Sock-
socket, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so this is when they made those changes to Torghast, which I think was good. They also added partial Soul Ash catch up. So like after the first time you completed a floor, you get your full Soul Ash rewards, and then if you completed that same floor again, I think it was like 20%. You got 20% of what you would have gotten.
Yeah.
They added some ability to run it. We'll see in the Ripcord patch they change all that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Torghast becomes kind of fun. Like I actually ran Torghast a bunch during this patch.
Yeah.
Um,
The
for
fire
both like
sorry, go
sorry,
ahead.
I was gonna say for not only the resources, but like for the chance at conduits or for the chance
Yeah.
at sockets and things like that.
I
So
did a
not too
bunch
bad.
like I didn't do sales. I knew several people who did Torghast sales and
Oh
like
really?
that was
Okay.
always also really good because I mean alts in Torghast not the greatest experience, just period.
No.
Um but I did a bunch. There's still at this point like a huge disparity in how good different specs are in Torghast. And so I did a bunch of basically carries in guild where like, mage has a hard time doing the highest Torghast layer. Um, maybe it wasn't mage. You can like yeah, you just kill a boss, but you know you have like a rogue or a priest or something that like unless you get very specific powers, it's pretty rough.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I did a bunch of just like guildies needed to do Torghast. I can do a Torghast run in like 8 minutes and guarantee that I'm going to get zero cooldown touch of death and or corrosive dosage by the end and just like solo the whole thing. Um, so I did a lot of that. That was actually really fun for me to do it with a DPS because doing it as brewmaster, your first floor is just like really slow until you get
Yeah.
your build going, and then you just like blast. So having a DPS to help with the first floor made it a lot smoother. Um,
Exactly.
Now, this is the patch where, like, as a monk, Torghast became like kind of fun. Like, I had a
Yeah.
good time.
No. Yeah. For sure. For sure. Um, but yeah, Torghast is those things there, and then a couple of just minor. I guess maybe not as minor, but some weird things. You could mount in the mall now because like the eye had gone to Sanctum, so that was fun.
Yeah,
I guess. And then legendaries they added in covenant specific legendaries. So this was specifically for Mistweaver, the Rise of Venthyr,
yeah,
and the Venthyr legendary that gave you reduced cooldown on your Fallen Order ability. There's a bunch of Mistweaver balance changes done also in this patch, but basically this was the patch where you started to see the shift from the Kyrians and Necros to just playing Venthyr because a 1 minute Fallen Order is just a ridiculous amount of healing, regardless of what else you do.
yeah, yeah,
um, so yeah, so this was I think this was probably one of the better patches from a Mistweaver perspective, and particularly as we sort of go into maybe a little bit of a raid discussion. Like in Sanctum, it was very very nice to have that ability on a 1 minute cooldown because a lot of the damage was either consistent damage or it was on a 1 minute cycle already, right?
yeah, yeah. And this comes off like they nerfed Disc Priest's Spirit Shell from 1 minute to 90 seconds. So their
Yep.
stuff no longer lined up with every single damage event.
Hmm.
Um, but there was a lot of raw damage. Like Soul Render had a lot, Remnant had a lot. Painsmith did not until you got deeper into the fight. But then deeper into the fight, like your Mistweaver could just like hard carry the phase 3 healing.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
because yeah, you get it twice if you line it up right. So Yeah, I mean, this was my favorite patch. As like it's just fun doing a lot of healing, and as a Mistweaver, like I mean, you could play without raid frames for the majority of it. Just like hit all your buttons on cooldown, do some DPS in the middle, and like you won the healing meter. So, but yeah, so Sanctum, maybe we spend a couple minutes on
Yeah,
just
actually,
say the raid. Oh, sorry.
one more note on like covenants and legendaries for
Yeah.
monks. Like Windwalker, this is where they switched to Necrolord. This was tied
Hmm.
to Kyrian nerfs, or I guess generally like single target nerfs. Um, and the new capstones for like Kevin's Oozling. Um,
Oh yeah.
so and they end up playing Necrolord. This is where the spin to win stuff really starts happening. You put Bone Dust Brew, you push Spinning Crane Kick a whole lot. You do like number one AoE.
Hmm.
And then for Brewmaster, none of the Covenant legendaries mattered at all. Zero.
You still played Shard Passions, right?
So Storm South Last Keg is what we had played primarily in Castle Nathric. It was just like 1% behind Shard Passions and significantly better defensively and significantly easier to play. So you just like always Storm Stouts.
Right, right, right.
This tier is one where Shard Passions was actually like 10% ahead,
Yeah.
and so there was a lot more people playing it. I am still like unsure if it was correct to play it over Storm Stouts just because of how much easier Storm Stouts is to play.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Like I played Shard Passions on Sylvanas, primarily because of actually the phase 1 and phase 2 damage checks. And
Hmm.
because in phase 3, I was on vacuum duty. I was not doing very much damage regardless. I would have gotten more phase 3 damage by playing Storm Stouts.
Right.
Um, but I was not doing very much damage regardless of what I did in phase 3. I was spending so much time off platform.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it was kind of a shakeup for I think all three specs, but definitely Mistweavers the most.
Yeah, well, I think we're the largest. Yeah. Particularly because I don't think before this anyone had played Venthyr. Like this was the like people had sort of mixed between Night Fae, Kyrian, Necrolord, and yeah, this was the first I think season or I guess yeah patch where Venthyr became a thing. So but yeah, let's maybe we'll spend a couple minutes talking about Sanctum because we still haven't gotten to the Ripcord stuff. But
Yeah,
Sanctum, I think we spent a lot of time talking about the biggest part of Sanctum outside of the fights themselves is of course the gems, right?
yeah,
The
the
whole
domination
socks,
sets.
yeah, the domination sets. And like I think as a concept, I like the idea of something that isn't a tier but still has tier like impacts to your power. I think the way that they were implemented was honestly one of the worst implementations of a power gain system ever. Like
Yeah,
you had weird acquisition rules where like you needed not only the
yeah,
sockets but an item to activate it, and then also like the upgrading of it was like with a limited resource meant that like in many cases you just held your upgrades until maybe like a weekend that was like okay now finally like this is the set I'm going to go to because if I put all
yeah.
my points into a set that ends up being either fixed or nerfed or changed you just lost. You're a week behind now. Yeah, for the full time.
There's also stuff like early on, you were able to accidentally delete gems by putting another one in.
Yeah,
So there
yeah.
are a bunch of people that lost upgraded gems, where they upgraded one of their gems, and then for like Mythic Plus, they wanted to switch from Unholy set to Frost set, and deleted their like rank 2 or rank 3 Unholy gem.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and the original system didn't contain the like if I guess once you could upgrade them your gems, but the set bonus of the gem didn't increase with that level. That was something that was added later. I think it was only
no,
like a week later,
that
but
was
still.
added as part of the. That was not on BTR, but it was in live immediately.
Oh, okay. So sorry, got it. Okay. I thought they had added like the reset, like the second reset. So it's still very early, but okay. I didn't realize
Yeah,
it launched. Like, okay, fair
yeah,
enough.
it launched
I
with
forgot about
that,
that.
and that is kind of where like the week 2 power gains were really big because people were getting like bonus to their dominations.
Yeah.
The people that had them got a huge bonus to their domination. I guess it was technically week and like heroic week, mythic week 1,
Yeah.
and then mythic week 2. Um, but yeah, it in terms of acquisition, it had all the downsides of tier sets,
None of the upsides. Like
Uh,
no redeeming qualities. Like
so like you only needed 3, right? You only needed 3 in order to turn your
right.
stuff on. But one of those 3 had to be the like one specific item for your set. So you needed like for Unholy you needed Helm, Blood you needed Shoulders, and for Frost you needed Chest, I think. Or maybe I've got
Right.
Frost and Blood
Yeah,
swapped.
but you needed like one specific
Right.
piece of the socket set to enable that specific bonus. So if you
Yeah.
wanted the blood bonus, but you didn't have shoulders,
You were fucked.
even though you had 3 blood gems, you didn't get the blood
You
stat
could have
bonus.
4 set items, 3 blood gems, and no blood set.
Yeah.
I
Which
have
is
a spreadsheet with a bunch of math on like acquisition for these and how that played out and how
yeah.
it did end up in terms of numbers. It actually did. It was significantly better than it would have been if they had just put tier sets in with no extra like controls in place.
Mhm.
But it was still not good.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
did see when they came out in Sanctum, they had controls in place for the tier sets where like you always got 2 tier tokens from the bosses. And that's
Yeah.
basically that made it kind of a quick. But it was oh man. And
Yeah. And oh sorry.
it wasn't even so the tier sets, the domination sets were not something that you really around. They were just kind of passive power gates. And
Right.
you could say that for a number of the sepulcher tier sets as well. But there were at least some where you played around them.
Yeah.
Or they did like really impactful things to your character that you could feel, even if the numbers maybe weren't as big.
Yeah. And like even like and they almost were too powerful if you think about it in terms of like I mean I think you had talked about this like your raid team I think ran a ton of blood sets just for
Yeah.
the extra healing for like specifically like Sylvanas and some of the like
We
Sylvanas and Painsmith, right?
we ran all blood sets, basically the whole tier. Everybody ran
Yeah,
blood sets.
because it was not as it wasn't a huge damage loss from like the Frost or Unholy, but it had such an upside in terms of like the healing, right?
Right. You're
Like
talking about
the
the
self
whole
healing.
raid. So the other thing is because of the scaling of the tier set bonuses or the domination set bonuses, there were no more damage checks after you got through like rank 3 of your set bonus. It didn't matter what set bonus it was. Like there are
Hmm.
some specs that it couldn't be Frost,
Yep.
because they just couldn't trigger it. But by and large, it didn't matter what your set bonus was. Once you hit rank 3, there were no more damage checks in the team.
Right.
And like I mentioned, the Sylvanas like phase 1, phase 2 stuff, but that was really more of like consistency of push timing kind of thing, not like we need to actually like really hard push to beat this damage check. It was more like
Right.
we
Yeah.
want to push at exactly the same spot each time, kind of.
Yeah. Exactly.
And domination, like the blood set, did 2 things. One, it was extremely consistent because it was just a dot. It's
Mhm.
just a dot. That heals you. It leaches health to you. And the other thing is that the unholy set, which is the one that everybody wanted to run, you could lose your unholy stacks depending on when it procced. And so you could completely lose a usage of it. And if that happened, then it was worse than blood set. And if that
Right.
happened, then your damage profile changes pretty dramatically. Whereas blood set always the same, always active, very good healing. Like it was like having an extra half a heal.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that the sets themselves are just they were a huge power increase, which I think is what you want to like everybody wants to see from like a tier set like thing. It's just like the acquisition of them was annoying, and then once you got them, you forgot about them. Like I'd
Yeah.
never swapped gems ever because the individual gems were so not impactful. Like some people, maybe if you mid max in Mythic Plus, where the set bonuses weren't active, but in
Right.
general, like the individual gems were like
Oh
not
yeah, I forgot about
super
that.
impactful.
The
Yeah,
the sets didn't work in Mythic Plus, but the individual gems did.
yeah. So it was a weird thing. So, but yeah, then into Sanctum itself. I mean, let's be honest with you. Sanctum was 2 bosses. It was Painsmith and Sylvanas because it had probably one of the not one of the probably the worst like difficulty downward trend after a difficult boss because you killed Painsmith and then you basically were on Sylvanas
Yeah.
because every boss after Painsmith was a sub 20 pull boss. Like we two shot
Kael'thas
Guardian.
was a little bit more. But yeah, we did the same thing with
I
Guardian.
like
Guardian was a joke because of the dominations. Like for the world first race, it was because they could overheal it. right? And they could just do
Right.
more. They found the critical point where it was worth it to add a healer to gain fight time to make the DPS check irrelevant. For the rest
Exactly.
of the world, it was because we had rank 5 blood sets or rank 5 whatever sets, and
Yeah.
you didn't need to overheal it. You just killed the boss.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that's actually a little bit. I would have loved to be kind of like a fly on the wall in the like Blizzard internal whatever chat system they use, Teams or Slack or whatever, to watch reaction of the tuning team to the last minute like 500% buff to the set bonuses at rank 5
Yeah.
and be like,
Exactly.
I wonder what they thought about that. Were they like, oh my god, all of our tuning work is like gone out the window now?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, like that was a joke. I mean, and then even like Fate Scribe,
The scribe
like
was, could you do the intermission? Yes, no.
right, and it was more of like not even could you do it, is like could you get 5 or 6 people to stand on a rune and not run into balls or run into their own beam,
Yeah.
like as they
Oh,
like as they do this.
oh my god. The beams on Fate Scribe starting from the center and killing you when you are trying to stand on it, so you have to stand on the edge, is number one, something that they should have caught in testing. It fixed.
Yeah.
Number two, something that is actually a travesty that has not been fixed in season 4.
Yeah, you can't dodge and you can't you yeah, you can get hit by your own beam. So if you stand towards the middle part of your rune, you will get hit by your own beam and die.
Yeah.
And like yeah, like to this day we still I mean we last time we did Fate Scribe, I think we had somebody die to that exact thing. And
Yeah.
it's just like just dodge, always dodge out. Like always
Yeah.
if you're gonna dodge something, you dodge out and you come right back in. But yeah, the fact that you didn't have to like because the mechanic was you could basically turn the runes either clockwise or counterclockwise depending on the amount of people standing on it.
Yeah.
The idea, like at the end of the day, Limit
You
found out
you
that you could
always
just
go
send one
left.
person. Yeah, you just send one person, and you have enough time as long as you're on the rune within like 3 seconds of them spawning
Yeah.
to make it around the circle to dunk it in. So
And the
yeah, I mean it.
issue with doing it, like trying to do left and right, is that you would have to coordinate that with people like stepping off of runes to turn off their beams, because if you walked through the beam, you would die.
Yeah, from the die. Yeah, yeah,
But there wasn't really time to do that, really. Like that kind of coordination is just not something really like.
yeah, and it's yeah that you don't have it. Actually, that brings up a good point. In one of the interviews, I think it was with Ian. Ian talked about the fact that like the arms race with world first guilds and the fact that they've put so many mechanics, particularly in Sepulcher, that are like one person makes a mistake, whole raid wipes. He's like they want to move away from that. He's like that was a little bit
Good.
much. Right, where it's like you shouldn't the entire raid should not wipe because one person makes a mistake once like 6 minutes into a fight,
Right,
right? Like
and
that
that is
shouldn't be
very much
the
like the face scribe thing. Like I
case.
cannot
Yeah.
imagine doing Fate Scribe if we had to actually go left and right and do the beats.
That's a 200 pull boss. Like
Yeah, easily.
I really think so. So,
Um,
um,
yeah,
but
it
I'm
was
sorry.
yeah, it was not pleasant. But then like Kel'Thuzad again was the other thing about Sanctum is it was push timer central. Every
Yeah,
boss had some push timer pretty much that you could do, or benefited greatly from doing. Like Fate Scribe, he didn't spawn any new things once you hit 2.5% above whatever his next push, so 70% or
transfer.
40%. So what you would do is you would get to 72.5, you would stop on the boss, you would clean up whatever ads you had up,
And then
deal with any damage that was going out, because you knew that nothing else was going to happen. You could get Twist of Fate, which is the dot that would get applied to the raid, and that was. And so you would just clean everything up, then you would push the boss and you would do the intermission. But honestly, like 2.5% of the boss's health is not that much, and it was very easy to accidentally push.
right, particularly with the gems and
Yeah,
like certain things procking
yeah,
during that. So,
yeah,
um, so yeah, so that I mean that was yeah, that was sort of the annoying part of the end of the thing. I will say though, like we're a little short on time, but if we think about Sanctum, like as the two bosses as Painsmith and Sylvanas, um, I think other bosses are sort of I think not interesting enough to talk about. I think in general because this raid was only two bosses, this is to me the worst raid of this instance. And I think even Sylvanas, while not a bad fight, was probably 4 or 5 minutes too long, or like maybe not
yeah,
4 or 5 minutes, but it was a too long of a fight for your first kill.
yeah.
Um,
It was a
particularly with
14-minute
the
kill for us first time, I think.
four, 14 minutes. Yeah, we were probably around the same, which is like the phase two part of Sylvanas was unfun. Like, no matter how many times I did it, I did not like it.
It was so much better. It's one of the few things where like the mythic changes actually like really significant. On heroic, it was miserable. You spent so much time like waiting for Thrall or Jaina to spawn a bridge. But then
Yeah,
on
even
mythic,
phase one on Mythic was nice because the arrow spawns were consistent. So
yeah,
actually, Sylvanas is actually probably that statement. I think applies to the whole fight that Sylvanas was a better Mythic fight than it was a heroic
yeah,
fight.
it was a really like
Still
it
long.
was not my favorite fight, um, sure, but it was a lot better on mythic than heroic. Heroic was actually just like anti until you hit phase three, and then Arch
Yeah,
in chat is getting whole DPS PTSD though from talking about the trade.
yeah. No, that was definitely across the board. But I think, yeah, I mean, you had Sylvanas very long, quote unquote epic. I don't know how epic it was fight. I mean, we did kill it as the last raise was going on the final platform our first time. So it's like
Yeah,
it had those moments like similar to Sire moments. But I will tell you, I felt I did not feel as excited to kill Sylvanas as I did to kill Sire. And even
yeah,
like Painsmith, for example, was like just not like Painsmith was fun in terms of like difficulty um and like the mechanics and things like that. But the problem was is there was like one person screws up, entire raid wipes. Like
yeah,
you get your one chain person who runs the wrong way in phase three and
and the whole
everyone's
raid's
dead.
dead.
And it's just
Yeah, I,
ugh,
I would
annoying.
say that I would put Sanctum above Sepulcher in terms of raids of this expansion, and it is primarily because um honestly, Sepulcher just does not have very many boss fights that I look for. Whereas like Soul Render was fun,
Hmm.
if basic, but it was fun. Uh, Ainsmith was very good. Guardian was fun to do. Again, basic but fun to do. Sylvanas on farm was fun to do.
Yeah.
I like that fight on farm. I did not like it as much on prog, but on farm when you like overgear it and you just like murder, a lot more fun.
That's fair.
And like Remnant, once you reach the point that your DPS stopped changing the push timers every week, was kind of fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that
That's
one
true.
again, that was like push timer hell. So and that one was the one I remember every single week. The order of mechanics changed because of when we
Yeah.
pushed from one phase to the next. Yeah, that was
Yeah, that's true. That's true. No, that's fair. That's fair. Um, well, cool. Yeah, so that's sort of Sanctum. We also had a couple of quick things in terms of Mythic Plus. So this was the introduction of Mythic Plus rating. So they added Mythic Plus rating into the game, which sort of then gave you the whole teleports being added for doing like plus 20s, and then you had your Mythic Plus score, which gave you your KSM mounts and gave you the ability to upgrade gear to certain levels with Valor.
right.
That was all this patch, and they also added Tazavesh as a mega dungeon, not as Mythic Plus, but as the mega dungeon. And Tazavesh, I think fine. I think mega dungeons are always cool. Like this one was good. Karazhan was good back in the day.
Yep.
Mechagon was good. So Tazavesh was fun. I mean, annoying. Luckily for me, got the trinket I needed. Or initially very early, which was nice. Got hard mode done, which was fun. But yeah, Tazavesh was in at this point, and then the
Yeah.
rating piece. So cool. So maybe gosh, not a lot of time here to talk about Ripcord stuff. So
Oh
let's do
man.
here's
The
we have a
list we have here is like actually insanely long. I have
so
to
what I'll
scroll
do,
to see the whole thing.
how about I do this? I'll read through them all.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we basically say, okay, these are the big ones for us.
Yeah.
Okay. For the ones that you saw. So
Yeah.
this was everybody called it pulling the ripcord. It was this comment Ian made in an interview earlier on in the expansion where he was like, well, if people really don't like the changes, we'll pull the ripcord, which
Yeah.
essentially means like we will make massive changes. And this was when they did it. So here's the list. It's massive. So AoE cap removed.
Yeah.
Huge.
We barely
Um,
touched on the fact that AoE caps were in the game up until this point. Like from the beginning of
yeah,
Shadowlands up till this point. It's crazy.
yeah. They well, this I'll skip that one. So then they also did once you reach 80 renown on a covenant, you can freely swap to any other covenant you want. So they basically had free covenant swaps whenever you want. Got rid of the quest to do, which was great. They made a bunch of stuff repeatable. So particularly the collect souls quest repeatable for your sanctum, so you could then power level sanctum. So it was always annoying to wait while getting like 12 or 20 souls a week. They removed conduit energy finally. We talked
Yes.
about that last week, which was a great change for people who needed that. They once you unlocked a third soulbind on one character, you unlocked it on any character for that. So you didn't have to do your full Covenant campaign to get to your third soulbind, which was massive. Legion time walking was added in 915,
Legion Mythic
including the
plus
mage.
time walking and the oh
Yeah,
yeah, and the Mage Tower.
and the mage tower,
Yeah.
like the mage tower, huge thing. They added a bunch of heirloom scouting maps for all the X packs. So all the expansions you get like all your flight points easily, which was I think a great change if you wanted to level. They added the gateway control shard, so you could use warlock gateways
Yeah.
versus the old focus macros, which was
Another
always fun.
another thing
Um,
on Painsmith that was always a pain was having to
God,
like set up the gateway, focus the gateway. If somebody forgets and the ad spawns on them, it's a raid wipe.
they're dead. Yeah.
Can't kill it.
Yeah, it was always annoying. We already touched on this, but massive Korthia speed up stuff. So they basically made Korthia a joke to sort of catch up with. The added the refund of Soul Ash and Soul Cinders to Legendaries, so you can now destroy Legendaries and get everything back but the basic item. And then they of course updated repeatable Torghast Soul Ash farm, so you can now repeat any sort of Torghast and get full rewards back. So you didn't have to wait on like a weekly basis or whatever,
Yeah.
get those reduced rewards. So it made any sort of catch up, any sort of change you wanted to do huge. And I'm probably missing some. Like I literally read through the notes. It took me like 20 minutes to put this list together because I was like, I gotta add this, I gotta add that. So yeah. So
It was
um
this was a huge patch. Like this
yeah.
is in some ways actually Shadowlands had like the biggest 0.5 patches just ever.
Yeah.
Because like
Oh yeah.
9.0.5 was like Valor PvP gear changes. It was just a bunch of changes to dungeons, to systems in the game, and then
Mhm.
9.15 again, the Ripcord patch. Like probably the biggest 0.5 patch that the game has ever had.
Yeah. Oh, they added I just read they added the authenticator requirement to do group finder stuff.
Oh yeah, this is where
So
they
you
started
can do
cracking down on ad stuff too.
yeah, on all the ad stuff. So you had like to do like custom search, like custom text in your group names, you had to have an authenticator attached to your account.
Right.
Um
And
and all that stuff. Yeah.
there are
Yeah.
two ways to have an authenticator on your account. One is a physical like dongle that you can get from them.
Hmm.
Um, Second is you have a phone, and phones are a slightly less fungible resource than just like being able to buy a new account. So
Yep.
it lets them cut down on like some of the bot spam for sales and things. But this is
Yeah.
also uh, this is the patch where they kind of like put the hammer down on sales stuff as well.
Hmm.
Um, so a bunch of the big communities like broke up here. Gallywix got banned for real money trading. Uh,
Oh yeah.
Starlight got banned for real money trading. It was like, and this is also, I guess, then the precursor to my guild moving to Area 52 because we couldn't, like, without sales income, we literally couldn't rally in.
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
Because like, basically, we were doing guild bank transfers of materials to make legendaries or of legendaries themselves, and um, the guild banks that were coming to us from sales communities with a bunch of gold on them,
Hmm.
and so without those,
Huge.
all of our like legendary stuff is like inaccessible. So we had to
Yeah.
we effectively had to move servers. Um,
Exactly.
but yeah, I think this was like really there's a moment where I think that they had to seriously consider like maybe we were actually just wrong about everything. Maybe they
Yeah.
were just wrong. And this is the moment where they had to look at that and very seriously say, okay, yeah, we were wrong.
Yeah.
And a lot of the changes, they completely backed out. Stuff like the Covenant changes, the AoE caps, conduit energy went away, something that they had defended before. Um,
Hmm.
and this is also the first test of like really having end game, high end level old content form of Legion Plus.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and that was a massive success, even if a lot of their metrics were probably skewed by people farming specifically.
The ring.
Yeah. Well, no.
The-
The Black Recall. It's not Black Recall. Vault of the Wardens. Vault of the Wardens had two different trinkets for melee DPS. Tirathon's Betrayal and whatever the Frost one was. I have both.
Gotcha.
I actually just vendored them. I have both. Um,
Nice.
and then it had a caster trinket, Moonlit Prison.
Mhm.
So and it had a healer trinket that gave a ton of mana. Uh, I don't remember what it was. It was like specifically really good for Resto Druid because it would like get triggered by all of their hops.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, like it had a ton of stuff, so people were just like hardcore farming both. Quarter Stars was then the other one and had the auto attack ring, which was
Yep.
actually, fun fact, not only buffing auto attacks, but we didn't find that out until later.
Yeah.
It was actually, so the way that the damage formula works for abilities that are based on your weapon damage is that it's basically like your weapon damage gets converted to attack power and then gets added with your regular attack power, and then that determines your ability damage. Well, the ring was just multiplying your attack power or your weapon damage by 10%, or like by adding 10% to it. Um, but the last time it had been relevant was in Legion before this had happened.
Right.
So
Yeah.
BFA was where they changed the abilities to work like this. So it was actually buffing all of your abilities by 10%, not just your auto attacks.
Seems okay.
A little bit good, a little bit good. We did not know about that until several weeks after the Legion Time Walking went away. So if you farmed it because it was good for your auto attacks, you were like sailing. And if you did not, well, it sucks to be you.
Right.
But this is also like they initially were going to have Legion Time Walking up for like 2 weeks, and it ended up staying around for a month. Mage Tower
Yeah.
was going to be around for 2 weeks. There were a lot of Mage Tower sales, and they actually really cracked down on those, and they took away people's like skins and things from completing the Mage Tower.
Yeah. Which was big. Yeah.
But then they also like that ended up being available for over a month, and then came back in patch 9.2 per.
Yeah.
And like there's just a bunch. This is the point at which I think, at least personally, I stopped being like really critical and negative about the decisions that they've made and the design choices that they've made,
Mm-hmm.
and start being a little bit more like, oh hey, this actually like makes sense.
Right. Yeah. I think this is too I was in a similar boat where I was less like I'd say negative about their decisions and more like they're just like they made a decision, they stuck with it, and like they've shown with something like this patch that they will change if the voice like if as a community or as players we're loud enough, right?
Yeah,
Like this was the patch where I'm like, maybe they do listen. Previous this patch, I'd be like, Blizzard just does whatever they want. They're making the game terrible. It's like, extremely negative sort of comments that way. And I
yeah,
think this was the one where they're like, okay, maybe they are willing to like totally shake up the game. And I'll say that the nice thing too, if we look a little bit forward, is a lot of what they did with this patch, like the changes they made from the previous version of these systems to the new one, you can see in the way they're designing the Dragonflight system,
yeah,
right? Like you can see that sort of same idea of like, we will make as much as we can. Like we will try and not restrict as much as we can to allow you to do what you want inside of the game.
right,
Like I think previously they like had this mentality of like your character is what you care about and like they want to make that character go through the journey and each
yeah.
character goes through their own journey where like I think a lot of times people today don't play one character, they play an account of characters or multiple
Yeah.
characters. So
There's
like
also like some people do play effectively one character. Um and for
yeah, I mean
them
I'm
they have
like
a
that, yeah.
very different experience, but even then it's like you were really forced into doing everything or almost everything. Like you could get out of doing
Yeah,
PvP basically, and that's it.
right.
Where if you look at like rating, um in order to get your nomination set upgrades, you had to have done the rep or one of the reps in Korthia because they were gated behind honored with whatever the like whatever the rep was for the next lady.
Yeah, the bone
Bones
guy.
with
Yeah,
higher
yeah.
mirror, yeah.
Yeah,
Because if you didn't have that, you couldn't upgrade your stuff. Um,
exactly.
and so there was stuff that you had to do in Korthia then in order to raid, and it was actually required. And then from there, it's like not a very long leap to, hey, mandatory sockets.
Yeah,
Hey,
now you got to get
mandatory
sockets.
conduits. Like I know for my guild we didn't require it. I didn't do it.
Yeah.
Like so, if I wasn't doing it, we couldn't require it basically.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
No, yeah. So I mean, I would agree that this was definitely the Ripcord patch, and I think of all of these changes, I think we're good. I think for me personally, funnily enough, the change that I think I liked the most was actually the gateway control shard change.
that was actually
Because
really nice.
I was a player that, like, as personally, I would always forget to focus the gateway.
Yeah,
Like, it's literally like generally I'd get it like the second, third pull of the night, I remember. But the first
yeah,
two pulls, if we got to that point where like me furiously spamming, trying to click, like,
yeah.
please get
The
me there.
worst part was if you reset the boss after people set up their focus macros, and then the gateway would go back up, but people would forget to reset their focus macros,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
No, yeah.
then you'd get to it, and like the entire raid is parked on the gateway trying to click it.
Yeah, no, that was. I mean, the shard was big, and to be fair, it's also funny because in my guild, it's become a meme that none of our new trials know it exists. So that's the other thing is Blizzard
Really?
does a terrible job of like pointing players to it
Yeah,
post this patch.
yeah.
So if you didn't play at the launch of this patch
You
or
don't
of
know it exists or
915,
how
you
to get
don't
it.
know about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we
It really should have been a toy too, because that's the other thing is like every alt forgetting to get it on.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Because that's like when I was playing my mage in season 4, I we did Painsmith the first time, and I'm like, oh shit. And like
I don't have it.
it ended up being okay for me in particular because I was playing a mage and I just blinked twice and I was there, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But if I were playing literally anything else, it would have been like a wipe.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
but yeah, they actually so there I did figure out how to get the interaction key stuff working in Dragonflight pre-patch, which
Cool.
you can replace your gateway control shard with that, with a big caveat. Put a Jeeves or something on top of that, or a feast, then it's very difficult to control which one you use. So practically, I still have the gateway instead, because it's just like if you're required to use the gateway for something there, it is very important that you use the gateway when you mean to, not
Yeah.
accidentally try and use the feast or a Jeeves.
Fair enough. I didn't realize that, but yeah, no. So that was I think that was to me the biggest piece of this patch was that thing. I don't know
It's
about
certainly
you.
the
You were
like biggest in terms of in-game things like
yeah
longevity. That's like the biggest thing. Like we're gonna be using that thing for years.
yeah oh yeah yeah
I think the biggest thing for me personally is not even really in game. It's really from their side. They had to basically really publicly be like, we were wrong, and then
yep
start correcting. And that's the
yeah
biggest thing for me from this patch.
yeah yeah exactly exactly. Well, cool. I mean, I like I said, I think we can running out of time on this podcast. I think it's a
Yeah,
common
there's
theme for us,
yeah.
but this I think for this patch, like this is for all intents and purposes the Ripcord patch, and I think any way you look at it, any way you want to slice, it, you can be negative that it took them this long to make these changes, which I
Yeah.
think is just in general a bad
It,
take anyway.
for
But
reference, it did take them a year almost.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
expansion released on like November 26, 2020. 9.1.5 released on November 2nd, 2020.
right. So it did take them a while, but I think they got there, and I think it seemed like this was a massive shift in just the overall team mentality. So it was, I think it'll have a lasting sort of impact for how they view, like we talked about Dragonflight and anything previous to that too. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, this was a big one. This was a ton of stuff, and I think I mean, ultimately was a good change um, for the game. So, but to your point, the mentality of the team I think was helpful. That, and we didn't really even touch on this, but this was also the whole sexual harassment thing that
I
sort of
was
popped up here,
just
and
thinking
there's
about
a
whether I should bring that up if we had enough time.
yeah, but I mean, like real quick, I mean, this was sort of that big the scandal, and not the
That
scandal,
happened
but
in
like
like July, which
yeah,
is
so it was
right
over the
around the raid
summer.
release. Uh,
Yeah,
they had a huge exodus of people during that time as well.
Right.
Some because they were fired, participating, and some because they were on the receiving end.
Yep. Yeah. And I
Uh,
think even some more too that were like didn't realize the extent of it or didn't even realize it was occurring and were sort of disgusted maybe by
right.
like the fact that the leadership allowed it to happen and sort of didn't want to continue. So there was to be fair with this patch, like there was also a ton of team shakeup at Blizzard.
Right.
Like this is the rise of if we think about some of the major developers that you hear today, like Reels and Scars are doing a lot of like the class stuff, like this is when they started, I think, to come into, I'd say, more prominent roles in terms of like
Yeah.
class pieces and
They've definitely
um
both been like involved in that before, but not as publicly.
yeah, yeah. So this is yeah, yeah, some changes there, but no, all in all, Ripcord patch, they did pull it finally a year into it, and I think in general it's made, we'll talk about 9.2 next week, but I think it's made the game better. Um, all in all. So I don't know if you have any final thoughts, final points.
What an expansion, man.
With the ups and downs, man, you go from like the opening of Sanctum, those shards, like even like the
we
restrictedness
did
of
a
covenants, and then you
yeah, we
then
did
you
like
hit this patch, and it's like, whew.
yeah, we did LFR for people's. We had a shaman. They did not get their domination set, or like they were missing the specific thing, and so we LFR. You could buy a crafted item that was higher eye level than what LFR dropped for like nothing. So our whole
Yeah.
raid got on male alts, bought the crafted helm, and then went into LFR with them, and we tried to get the helm, and nobody got it.
God, that's
Very
awful.
disappointing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was an adventure.
Yeah, for sure. I can't wait to talk about 9.2 next week. I feel like we'll have a lot more positives. So maybe. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is going to be it for our show today. Thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed this podcast and you want to support it and the other work that we do over on the Peak of Serenity, you can do that over on our Patreon at patreon.com/Peak of Serenity. And of course, come and join the Discord, which is just the best place to be for learning about all the new Dragonflight stuff. If you want to know about talent builds, I know what these nerfs to Resident Fists mean for your damage. Is the talent still worth it? Spoiler, yes. That's the Discord is just a great place to get that information. But that is it for the show today. Listening, and we will see you next week.
Bye.